Joining us now to discuss Chief Strategy Officer and Chair at the Center for Homeland Security and Immigration, former Acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf. Chad, thank you so much for coming on today. What are your top-line thoughts when you hear about this report?
So I think it's important for the American people to really understand what the department is proposing here. And so what they're doing is they're opening a new class of individuals. These are illegals that cross the border that can now be seen by an asylum officer instead of an immigration judge. So to have their asylum claim not go before an immigration judge, but go before an asylum officer has never happened before. And so what this means is now you don't have a U.S. government attorney, an ICE attorney, asking these migrants hard questions about their asylum claim because we know there's a lot of asylum fraud. Instead, it's going to be a USCIS officer that's going to ask them a few questions, and more than likely, you're going to see a lot more asylum claims be granted. And I'm afraid that it's going to be a lot of fraudulent claims that are going to be accepted over a period of time.
Why do you think this approach is happening now?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think what it doesn't do is it doesn't address the underlying problem of what's occurring on the border. And in fact, I think in some ways it actually will incentivize more. It's going to be another pull factor because once the cartels and the smugglers and others start to realize what's going on inside this rule or proposed rule, they're going to advertise that you can now go to cross that border. You'll never have to go to an immigration judge. Instead, you'll be seen by a low-level USCIS asylum officer, and odds are they will grant your asylum claim. And so it's going to be another pull factor, and it's going to contribute to the mess that we see on the border today. It's not going to help it.
When you talk about what these officers might be looking for in granting asylum, what's sort of the bar that you would have to reach to actually prove that you are desperately in need of finding refuge in the United States?
Well, so these asylum officers do go through training, and they're asking a number of questions. And usually these interviews take hours for a variety of different reasons. But the problem with this rule is now that these officers are designed to ask questions that are very, non-defensive, very accommodating questions, versus having an attorney or an immigration judge ask some really probing questions about their asylum claim, about their fear of persecution, really getting down to the nuts and bolts of the legal requirements to be granted asylum. And so you're not going to have that critical eye looking at it any longer, in my view. Instead, you're going to have asylum officers that are going to have a workload, and they're going to do the interview, but they're going to probably grant that asylum claim. And I think over time, what you'll see is that asylum percentages of claims being granted are going to increase. And that's not the way that asylum should work. Asylum should be hard to get, and it should be a process to go through as well.
All right. I want to keep an eye on that story. That's just fascinating. But in the meantime, though, the southern border could be bracing for even more people attempting to cross after possibly ending Title 42. And if it were to end, even CNN acknowledges that this could be a challenge. Let's listen.
U.S. officials are scrambling to prepare for a record-breaking surge of migrants attempting to cross the U.S.-Mexico border this spring.
And so what the Border Patrol has had to do is prepare for the event that there will be many more people coming in the next few weeks. And they are already, by the way, Brianna, over capacity. This week they had 16,000 people in custody in their facilities.
Wow. So again, CNN is recognizing that this could be a big challenge when you've got even more people coming across the border once Title 42 is reevaluated.
Well, those are just facts. I'm glad to see that CNN and others are actually starting to report the facts. And the reality is this, that Title 42 was always temporary. So what the administration should have been doing over the course of the last 13 to 14 months is to put in new policies and procedures that deter and address what is going on at that border. Instead, they have done nothing. They've put their head in the sand. And so when you see Title 42 go away and they throw up their hands and say, look, we're going to have more folks come to the border and that's going to be a processing issue for us, it's one that they could have solved, right? We have to remember that this crisis has been self-inflicted by the Biden administration because they tore down a number of successful programs that have encouraged this huge influx of individuals to the southwest border. So now they're in the place of trying to fix what they created. And what we're going to see, unfortunately, is we're going to see a lot of resources being thrown at the border because what they're going to try to do, unfortunately, is process more individuals. Instead of trying to address the underlying problem of the illegal behavior, They're simply going to try to process more individuals so they don't have them in lines, they don't have them under bridges, and so the media can't take pictures of them, and they'll say, we solved the problem, when in fact they haven't. You know, every given month, they're releasing or they're removing between 80 and 90,000 individuals under Title 42. If that goes away, the vast majority of those will be released into the country every single month.
And they'll be reevaluating that come April, so we'll get a final call on that then. I'd like to ask you about what's happening now, and quite frankly, what happened just in the past few days. The president has announced that the U.S. will be accepting about 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. There is a major humanitarian crisis of at least 4 million, according to this graphic here, have fled the country of Ukraine at this point. Chad, talk to me about the process of offering assistance to these Ukrainian refugees once they come to the States. What's that like? Is there a sort of vetting process as we would see in any other sort of refugee situation?
Well, there certainly should be. And let me just say at the outset, we need to do everything we can for those individuals that are being affected by this tragedy from Ukraine. But I think what we've seen, given what occurred in Afghanistan, is that this administration has very little credibility on how they process individuals coming in from overseas. And so what we saw is a very, very chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. What we know is they brought in individuals here into the U.S. that probably don't deserve refugee status. But anyway, they brought them in. They first paroled them in. They did not have an interview with a refugee officer, which is the process, is what it should occur. So they paroled them in for a year. That year has expired. So now they've given them temporary protective status, which again is a temporary measure for 18 months. And so the question is, with this administration, is are they following the procedure that each of these individuals need to be interviewed by a refugee officer and determined whether or not first they qualify for a refugee status, and then make sure that they are properly vetted? Because it only takes one or two bad individuals to get into the country and to do something really bad. So the procedures need to be followed, and they can be expedited a little bit. But again, I don't know that I have a lot of faith and confidence and trust, knowing that this administration cut all of the corners on all of those procedures when we look at the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Former acting DHS Chad Wolf joining us on the show. Thank you, Chad. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, quick program.